Evidence of the tyranny and cruelty of Queen Marika's reign can be found all over the Lands Between. From the near annihilation of the fire giants to the veiling of the Lands of Shadow, you can find proof of her cold brutality everywhere you look in Elden Ring. But there might not be a more tangible reminder of Marika's will to power than Rennala, last Queen of Caria. Once a respected sorceress devoted to the full moon, by the time we meet her in-game, Rennala is a shell of her former self, broken by the betrayal of Radagon, Marika's masculine alter ego. Through Rennala, the player gets an intimate look at the human side of Marika's ruthless rule, learns about the covert and clandestine means in which she eliminated many of her fiercest rivals, and discovers the deeply personal motivation behind the game's most popular ending. Like most major characters in Elden Ring, we hear about Rennala long before we actually meet her. Gideon Ofnir, who will be getting his own video someday, is among the first to comment on her. He says,
"The Academy of Raya lies to Limgrave's north, towering over the mist-laden lands of Leernia. Rennala is queen of the Carian royals, who govern the Academy, but Rennala herself is no demigod. Her beloved Radagon left her to become Queen Marika's second husband, taking the title of King Consort. The Great Rune dwells within the amber egg that was Radagon's gift to her."
Just as he does for all of the other major bosses, Gideon does a tremendous job of telling us who Rennala is and commenting on some of her major character themes in just a few short sentences. Here, he touches on two subjects that are critical to understanding her narrative direction: the amount of power she wields as an authority figure and her broken relationship with Radagon. Starting with her power level as an authority figure, we're told that she's the head mistress of the Academy of Raya, which stands tall above misty Leernia. This implies that she rules over all of Leernia. The truth, of course, is far more complicated than this, and Gideon himself knows this too, but for now, that's what we're supposed to suspect based on what he says here. Ruling over Leernia, of course, is no small feat. Leernia is by far the largest biome in the Lands Between. Sure, much of it is water, but still, this is a ton of territory, and the fact that Rennala supposedly controls it suggests that she's among the most powerful rulers in the Lands Between. On the other hand, in saying that she's no true demigod, Gideon is diminishing Rennala, highlighting her lack of status compared to the other shard-bearers. As we'll discuss more in future videos, the term demigod is as much about semantics as it is about science. Rennala's children were always full-fledged demigods because they were, technically speaking, children of Marika, but the kingdom didn't view them that way until Radagon became Elden Lord. And there are plenty of non-demigods in the Lands Between who still pack an incredible punch. It's really more of a title, an honorific, than anything else. Hell, by the time most players are having this conversation with Gideon, they just got done fighting Godric the Grafted. He's no demigod, but there's a good chance he was far from a pushover for the player. Thus, while Gideon isn't necessarily saying that Rennala isn't strong, he is saying she's a lesser entity in terms of her power and prestige. All of this is to say that there's a disparity between what the evidence suggests about Rennala's status and what people say about Rennala's status. It's similar to what I said in our last episode about Godric. The signs that they're powerful rulers are there, but all anyone does is talk down on them. And so the player, once again, is left to ask themselves, will the real Rennala please stand up? Moving on to her relationship with Radagon, this is likely the first time the player's heard of him at all. Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, came up a few times during our trek through Limgrave. Radagon, the second Elden Lord, isn't mentioned until we reach the Round Table Hold. For Gideon to reference their divorce, how he cast her aside in favor of Marika, clues us into how important his relationship with her is going to be to her character. The egg, Gideon indicates, ties into this as well. Later dialogue from him says that not only does it harbor a great rune inside of it, but that Radagon gifted it to her before he departed to take Marika's hand in marriage. And now, in his absence, she clutches the egg, demonstrating that she must dearly miss him, or at the very least, was left broken by the divorce. This relationship drama creates a mystery around Rennala in the mind of the player that's just as intriguing as the conversation about her power level. Why did Radagon leave Rennala for Marika? Was it simply because the Eternal Queen was the more prestigious bride? Why is Rennala still so heartbroken over his departure all these years later? Did she truly love him, or was his divine deed just that good? So right from the first moment she's mentioned, there are two huge mysteries about Rennala we can look forward to exploring: the power and influence she wields, and her tumultuous breakup with Radagon. Once the player arrives in Leernia, the answer to that first question becomes clear. The reason there's a disparity between what we see and what we hear about her power level is because Leernia is torn apart by a civil war, as Carian forces battle with the army of Raya Lucaria for control of the mist-laden lands. At one time, these two factions were aligned, with the Carians ruling over the Academy for generations. Now, they're at odds. And once we reach the famed Academy, we find that it's a bit of a ghost town. Unlike Stormvale or Lanedale later on, there aren't really any patrols in Raya Lucaria, just scholars going about their business, and pockets of Carian forces, like the marionette soldiers and Reichardt's abductor virgins, still keeping up the fight. For Leernia and Raya Lucaria to be in such a starry state suggests that its leader, Rennala, is asleep at the wheel. While most of the other legacy dungeons are war-torn, dilapidated, or full of soldiers who lack a modern purpose, as is the case with Elfvale, Raya Lucaria is unique in that it just feels so neglected. It's clear that someone is, at least in name only, in charge of the place, but it's obvious that they haven't actually explored the halls of the magic school in a very long time. This atmosphere is heightened by the lengths the player has to go to enter Raya Lucaria in the first place. As Topps tells us, the doors of the Academy have been closed for some time. Often, when a place of learning like this is closed off in a fantasy property, it's because they're trying to keep something in. But when you combine this with the air of neglect, it feels like someone just locked this place up, threw away the key, and hoped everyone would forget about the big Hogwarts-looking castle looming over the lake. And thus, everything about this place establishes that Gideon was right to question Rennala's power and prestige, because he just seems to be hiding away and letting this place fall apart. But why? Well, as we progress through the Academy, we get plenty of hints. First, one thing that really stands out about Raya Lucaria structurally is that there aren't any stakes in Marika. It's the type of thing you won't notice if you aren't looking closely, or unless you're dying a whole lot, but it really does speak volumes about the dynamics between Radagon's first and second wife. This observation leaves no doubt that not only does Rennala hate Marika for taking Radagon away from her, but that their divorce is a lingering source of sorrow for the Carian queen. Could it perhaps have something to do with her absence as well? This plotline deepens when the player comes across the Red Wolf of Radagon, the mini-boss they'll fight on the way to Rennala. With Radagon gone, why was it left behind? Was it, like the Amber Egg, a parting gift to her? Or did she insist on keeping it in the divorce, while he, seemingly, got to keep the kids? No matter what the case may be, it speaks to the way their breakup is portrayed as this unhealed wound for the Carian queen that's left her unable to govern the way she once did. Clarity on these matters, from Rennala's power level to the consequences of her divorce, comes from Muriel, who the player can find by passing through a waygate just a short distance from the lift that leads to the Carian Queen's boss arena. This waygate will take them to the Church of Vows, where the Turtle Pope keeps watch over the very same place where Rennala and Radagon were wed ages ago. He relays quite a bit of information, so let's review each of his statements one by one and then break them down.
You wish to know more of Lord Radagon. Lord Radagon was a great champion, possessed of flowing red locks. He came to these lands at the head of a great golden host. When he met Lady Rennala in battle, he soon repented his territorial aggressions there, and became husband to the Carian queen. However, when Godfrey, first Elden Lord, was hounded from the lands between, Radagon left Rennala to return to the Erdtree capital, becoming Queen Marika's second husband and king consort, taking the title of Second Elden Lord. The mystery endures to this day as to why Lord Radagon would cast Lady Rennala aside, and moreover, why a mere champion would be chosen for the seat of Elden Lord.
When I first encountered Muriel in Elden Ring, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. He seemed almost too bright of a character for FromSoftware, even in a game as colorful as Elden Ring often is. But he's truly an MVP NPC, a veritable wealth of information. Plus, my daughters are kind of obsessed with him, so that earns him a ton of points in my book. Anyway, what Muriel tells us here is that Radagon professed his love for Rennala and married her after meeting her in battle. It's not made explicitly clear, but the implication here is that prior to this wedding, Radagon was likely unable to defeat Rennala, either her armies or her personally. This suggests that even if her glory has faded now, as evidenced by her lack of control over the Academy and her absent authority, that at one point Rennala was indeed powerful. This will become obvious to the player later on, through the boss fights of both former parties, but to the uninitiated Tarnished, what Muriel is saying here is that Rennala was once strong enough to fight a future Elden Lord to a standstill. That's pretty impressive. You never hear about someone besting Godfrey, and yet the fact that Radagon was fallible is among the first stories we hear about him. So ages ago, Rennala was among the strongest individuals in the Lands Between, and confident enough in her status as queen that she was willing to oppose the forces of the Erdtree. That doesn't sound at all like the ruler who let her seat of power wither away. So we're left to ask ourselves, once again, what the hell happened to her? Was it just the divorce, or was it something more? When asked about Rennala herself, Muriel will say the following.
You wish to know more of Lady Rennala. She is queen, head of the Carian royal family, and governor of the Academy of Lucaria, the great and beautiful full moon witch. Sadly, her heart was broken when Lord Radagon left her. And then, when the Academy rebelled against the royals, she was locked away in the Grand Library. In the end, Lady Rennala was left alone, cradling the amber egg Lord Radagon bequeathed her. Now she devotes herself to it through forbidden rite, the grim art of reincarnation.
So although Rennala was once powerful enough to oppose Radagon, when he divorced her, she was left heartbroken and was locked away in the Academy's Grand Library. Specifically, it's likely that it was her fellow Academy members, the other professors and students, who shut her away. According to the Queen's Crescent Crown, when Rennala, head of both the Academy of Lucaria and the Carian royal family, lost her husband, Radagon, her heart went along with him. And then, those at the Academy realized that Rennala was no champion after all. The first line about Rennala's heart leaving with Radagon aligns with what Muriel already told us, but for those at the Academy to say that Rennala was never a champion is some revisionist history. We know she was indeed a worthy combatant earlier in her life. She went multiple rounds with Radagon, on the battlefield of course. They didn't go for rounds in the bedroom until later on. You could make the argument, perhaps, that Radagon was just toying with her when they fought each other, that he could have easily defeated her, but decided to take a different path for ulterior motives that we'll dive into in a few minutes here. But given that she is a real ass-kicker in the second phase of her boss fight, I don't think that's the case. Rather, I think this statement about the scholars realizing she wasn't a champion after all is a reflection of the extent of the damage the divorce did to her. She's so heartbroken that it's caused everyone around her to question her legitimacy, to forget that she was once a worthy opponent for Radagon. And thus, she gave the Academy members little resistance when they locked her away in the library so they could rebel and wage a civil war against what remained of Rennala's lineage. But still, the question persists. Was it just the divorce that did all this? Divorce has left plenty of people lost and looking for answers, but it certainly doesn't strip them of their power, nor does it completely shatter the spirits of powerful sorceress queens. At least not usually, anyway. A depression would be reasonable, even expected, but the fact that she allowed herself to be locked away, even based on what we know about Rennala's state of mind, and even before we actually meet her, suggests that it's far deeper than that. If you're one of many people, myself included, who always thought there was more to this story, then you're in luck. Because although the base game tells us little beyond what we can find and learn in Leernia, the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC does provide us with an answer about why the divorce broke Rennala to such a dramatic extent. In the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC trailer, we learn that Marika seduced and betrayed someone during her rise to power, likely the god of the Hornsent and their corresponding Elden Lord. Though we're not told much specifically, it's hard not to compare what Marika did to these two nameless individuals to what Radagon did to Rennala. It's likely that during Marika's early years, she wasn't strong enough to defeat them in battle, and didn't have an army to send at them, and thus she had to resort to subterfuge and deception to ascend to godhood. And when faced with a foe he couldn't defeat in Rennala, what did Radagon do? He seduced her, had 3 kids with her, and betrayed her by leaving her for Marika. Though it's unclear how much of their own history the people of the Lands Between are aware of, I'd wager that Rennala was at least vaguely aware of what Marika did to obtain power. She was almost surely alive at the time, and it might have even had something to do with why she opposed the Golden Army of the Erdtree with such fervor. And therefore, I suspect that when she was seduced and betrayed by Radagon, she realized that he'd done the same thing to her that Marika did to the god of the Hornsent, the previous Elden Lord, and knew that all along, she'd been fooled. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine marrying someone and having kids with them, and then after they betrayed you and divorced you so they could be with another person, you realize that the only reason they put a ring on it in the first place is because they couldn't defeat you on the battlefield. Now, your lands have been integrated into their kingdom. Your children have been assimilated into their divine lineage, while you've been reduced to a spurned lover and a powerless ruler who's lucky to be alive. To top it all off, this is something that's happened before, something that you should have known better than to fall for. Renala's not just dealing with the fallout of a messy divorce or a bad breakup, she's reeling from an existential crisis unlike any other. Every day, her emotions and thoughts probably bounce between her lingering love for Radagon, her fear for the future of her children, and her relief that her people didn't end up like the Hornset, and her determination to devote herself to her departed husband's last gift to her. That last bit I find to be particularly interesting, but we'll examine that further later on. All in all, this is a fascinating lore dump for Muriel that establishes him as not only one of Elden Ring's best characters, but one that leaves us primed and ready for our encounter with Rennala. But before we get there, I think it's essential to make note of another revelation from Shadow of the Erdtree that complicates all of this, the discovery that Rennala had a younger sister, named Rellana. It's implied that they were rather close. According to the description for the spell Rellana's Twin Moons, when her and Rennala were young, they found these twin moons together, and it seems that Rellana devoted herself to the twin moons much in the same way that Rennala devoted herself to the full moon. But it's said that Rellana was infatuated with Mesmer. It sounds like those carrion princesses really had a thing for red-headed dudes. And thus, when it came time for his crusade, she followed him to the Lands of Shadow, but not without a parting gift from Rennala, a few locks of lustrous black hair which she attached to her helmet. The hair was something to remember her by, something to remind her of her family while she was off battling Marika's enemies. This would seem to indicate that Rennala approved, or at least gave her blessing to, her sister's decision to go to war. Perhaps she did this because she knew it was what her sister wanted. Maybe she did it because she wanted to be a good vassal in Marika's kingdom. Or maybe it was Radagon who convinced her it was the right thing to do. No matter what the case may be, Rennala clearly allowed, to some degree, her sister to join Mesmer in his dark deeds. And what did the Carrion Queen earn for her troubles, for her loyalty to Marika? Nothing at all. Her beloved sister ended up trapped in the Lands of Shadow with a red-headed demigod, and thus, when Renala's own red-headed champion divorced her and took her children with him to Lanedell, she was left truly alone, with no one to turn to as her existential crisis deepened. Even queens need support systems. Thanks to a series of actions from Marika, Rennala was deprived of hers. Upon reaching the Academy's Grand Library, we'll finally encounter the Carrion Queen herself. Her introduction is among the most memorable in the entire game. Before we see her, our Tarnished nearly steps on one of her juvenile scholars, who then tries to take a bite out of our foot. We then see all the other juvenile scholars she's created. One by one, they giggle and light their candles until Rennala is visible, floating above them and cradling her amber egg like it's her most important possession. It's legitimately creepy, the kind of horror-style cutscene that makes me long for Bloodborne 2. The boss fight that follows is one FromSoftware has experimented with before, where in order to hit Rennala, the player first needs to target a specific juvenile scholar. Taking out 3 selected scholars will then cause the shield around Rennala to shatter, and result in her dropping to the ground, where the player can pummel her for a brief period of time, before she goes back to floating and the process repeats all over again. It is, in some ways, an iteration of the Deacons of the Deep, though far more memorable and more engaging. Whether it's their more cinematic boss fights, which we'll discuss in Rykard and Radahn's videos, or mob boss fights like this one, FromSoftware took many of their favorite concepts and tinkered with them here in Elden Ring. Most of them work better for them here than they did before. Like I said, I take Rennala over the Deacons every day of the week, but the fact that they do this in the first place makes me excited to see how they might explore this type of boss fight further in whatever game they end up making next. But from a character analysis perspective, in both the cutscene and the boss fight, we see evidence of everything we discussed in terms of the type of person Rennala has become since Radagon left her. She doesn't even look at us during the cutscene, and during the boss fight, she's distant and detached. The most intrusive thing she does to our Tarnished is throw a bookcase at us. But critically, she doesn't seem heartbroken so much as she is distracted. While she likely is missing Radagon, as we discussed earlier, and as plenty of folks and item descriptions have said, it wasn't really the post-breakup depression or the melancholy that caused Rennala to lose her power. It was the existential crisis that came about as a result of Radagon leaving her, and realizing that she was seduced and betrayed. Once the player has dropped Rennala's first health bar, she'll collapse to the floor and crawl towards the egg, continuing to speak to it about reincarnation, which is rather similar to what she said back in the pre-fight cutscene. It's then that a dark aura rises up from around the egg, and we hear a familiar voice. Ranni's voice. She calls us a foul trespasser, declares that we shall not disturb her mother's rich slumber, and conjures a projection of Rennala at the height of her power, when she was the queen of the full moon, and wielded the power of a majestic knight. Though I wouldn't call Rennala's second phase difficult, it certainly is more challenging. Her spells are stronger, she moves a decent bit, and she can unleash a bunch of powerful spirit summons, including a goddamn dragon. Though she's never really given me too much trouble on any of my runs, the fact that she's more powerful here speaks to the type of person she once was. No matter what the other mages at the Academy think of her now, she used to be a real badass, and this projection of her former self proves it. It's easy to imagine Rennala, in this form, holding off Radagon, which certainly wasn't the case with the previous phase. Focusing on Ranni for a minute, though she'll also be getting her own video down the line that will go through her storyline and character in detail, two things stand out to me about what she says here before summing this past rendition of Rennala. First, in calling her mother's present state a quote, rich slumber, it seems to suggest that she views her mother's current whereabouts and current activities, locked away as she is in the library trying to perfect the art of reincarnation, as something of a positive thing. To call it a rich slumber that shouldn't be disturbed almost makes it sound like she's saying that her mother is simply taking some time to herself, or engaging in a lands between version of self-care. Ranni can be rather cold throughout the game, and I say that as an unapologetic Ranni fan, but it is heartwarming to hear her talk about her mother's current activities in such a way. Second, though she might be looking at her mother's macabre self-routine in a positive light, it's obvious that she doesn't view her overall melancholy that way. She'd rather her be remembered as she was in the projection, a powerful sorceress who needed to be seduced and betrayed in order to be defeated. And while I think most of Ranni's motivations have to do with self-determination, with a desire to rid herself of the controlling two fingers and the lands between itself from their cyclical system, I'd be shocked if what her father did to her mother didn't play a part in her initial decision to forge her own path. If it were entirely unrelated, then I don't think she'd be so fervently protecting her mother and her image like this. But we'll discuss that further in Ranni's chapter of this series. In any case, once the projection of Rennala is defeated, the player obtains her Great Rune, the Great Rune of the Unborn, and she transitions to an NPC who the player can use to respect their character sheet or change their appearance. In doing so, she is essentially using the egg for its intended purpose, to birth souls anew. She'd been trying to do this with the Juvenile Scholars, but had largely been unsuccessful. According to the Juvenile Scholar set item description, cap worn by young Academy Scholars, the Juveniles birthed anew by the amber egg of Queen Rennala, head of the Rea Lucaria Academy. Yet their rebirth is not without perfections, and thus do they repeat the process, eventually becoming utterly dependent upon it. Rebirth is as sleep to them, and with each awakening, memory fades into oblivion. So even though the rebirths of the Juvenile Scholars do take place, they eventually need to be reborn again. That's not the case for us Tarnished, unless we want it to be, and even then, the game contains a limited number of larval tiers, meaning that we can only respec so many times before we're locked in. Thus, unlike Rennala's Juvenile Scholars, we need not be reborn again. But why is Rennala so obsessed with rebirth and reincarnation? Well, I think there are a couple of angles you can take here. Since it's powered by the egg, Radagon's last gift to her, you can look at her using the egg, the only thing she had left of her family after he divorced her and took their kids with him to Lanedale, as her way of trying to make sense of her existential crisis, to use what she still has to do something of value, to harvest her tears and turn them into crimson tears, so to speak. You could also look at it as her way of trying to, in a sense, craft for herself a new family. Again, her children, Ranni, Rykard, and Radahn, left with Radagon to become demigods. It's her way of being a mother again, like an empty nester taking in a whole bunch of cats after all her kids have left for college. But I think the truth about Rennala's obsession with reincarnation can actually be found in the final line of the Scholar set item description. Once more, it reads, "Rebirth is as sleep to them, and with each awakening, memory fades into oblivion." If Rennala is indeed going through an existential crisis in the aftermath of her divorce, as I've argued throughout this video, then I suspect that there's nothing more Rennala wants in this moment than for an oblivion of her own. To forget her seduction and betrayal at the hands of Radagon, to sunshine of the spotless mind away her entire relationship with him. Perhaps that's why Rennala keeps rebirthing the Scholars, out of envy for their own oblivion, and in the hopes that she'll one day master the art of reincarnation to the point where she'll be able to do it to herself and start a new life in a form that no longer recalls all of the terrible things that have been done to her. In that sense, Rennala truly is a living, breathing example of the horrors wrought by Marika beneath her Erd tree. And that's what makes Rennala so important to Elden Ring. Thanks for watching. Huge thanks to Moonlaugh's Piano, Yeppe Laugh, and Farewellion, who allowed me to use their music for this video. To check out all 3 of these amazing artists, just follow the links down below in the description box. Big shout out to all my Silver and Gold tier YouTube channel members and Patreon subscribers, including James Pruitt, Lil Caesar, Reed, Pathonian, Anna Novikova, Sean Bobby, Green, and Draco Woloski, who get early access to these videos thanks to donations of $5 to $10 a month. See you next time, and go birds!